Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and it's time for a weekend review, and in this one I'm going to be looking at the Gardens of Ynn, which is a delightful horticultural adventure for use in old school role-playing games, written by Emmy Allen. I've got a hard copy here that I ordered off Drive-Thru RPG. It's about 80 pages long in that sort of little digest size that's common in OSR games, and it's a largely black and white book, although it does have this slight pale green colour. So let's get into it. Now, if you've not seen one of my video reviews before, I rate a book based on 4 ratings, and these are writing, the look of the book, the system, and the background, and I give them either a plus, a minus, or a blank in each rating, depending on whether I think they're good, bad, or indifferent. Once I've got those ratings, I add them up to give me a final rating on the trusty fate ladder that you can see there. So let's get straight on with this. Now, I came across this book almost by accident when a fellow OSR anchorite, someone who puts out a podcast using the Anchor app, Colin Green, aka Spike Pit, and if you've not listened to his podcast, I really do recommend you give it a listen, mentioned this since he's a bit of a gardener, loves spending time out in his garden, so this really appealed to him. Now, I'm not a big fan of spending time out in the garden. I've let it be said that I let that put me off a supplement, and I know that Colin has fairly similar taste to my own when it comes to OSR games, so I decided to give this a look. And it's not particularly expensive. The Gardens of Ynn costs $5 US for PDF on Drive-Thru RPG, or you can get the PDF and this soft cover version for $20 US on Drive-Thru, and I'll put a link to that down below in the description of this video so you can give it a look if you want to. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the writing of the book and the sort of the concept of it. Essentially, Gardens of Ynn posits the idea of a sort of pocket realm or a sort of side dimension linked to your main campaign world, and it's a dimension that can be reached from any sort of overgrown wall that's covered by ivy and vegetation. The idea being that if you draw a door on said wall, then take your attention off it, but when you look back it will be an actual door, and when you open it, it will lead you into the Gardens of Ynn. The Gardens of Ynn is a once beautiful and well maintained luscious garden realm, once ruled over and cared for by these inhumanly and terribly beautiful she who are to the elves what elves are to humans, so incredibly, almost painfully beautiful beings. Now, these creatures, some sort of mimetic infection known as the thorns, was spread to the she who controlled the garden, and this infection ran rampant, being passed even just by mere discussion of it, and causing them to give into all manner of decadent behaviour and to become obsessed with spreading this infection. The she who were outside the realm shut it off and almost quarantined it, leaving behind some of their brethren to fall into decadence or to fall out of touch with reality, sealing it off so the infection couldn't spread any further. Now, one of the things I think is particularly unusual and that I like about this game is it doesn't really give you a massive map or an entirely pre-designed setting for the Gardens of Ynn. What it actually does is it gives you a number of tables to generate them procedurally. So as you enter, it gives you guidelines on how to run the adventure. So as you first step through into Ynn, you roll a d20 on the table for locations to see where the doorway leads. In addition, you roll a d20 on the table for details to give a bit of extra flavour to the location, and also for any events that are occurring there. And you map out Ynn every time the players enter it, because the garden dimension changes and is only really anchored to reality at points where it is closest to reality. The further you wander into this domain, the more wild, bizarre and unpredictable it becomes, and it can shift over time. So I think this is a great idea, since it justifies having a dungeon, if you will, that when your player characters go and visit it again, it's not going to be the same, so it shouldn't get stale or boring. So the way this works is you take a sheet of paper, in the centre at the top you write in the location where the players first enter. This is layer 1, and the way it describes the Gardens of Ynn is it's almost like those Russian babushka dolls, so like each time you press further in, you're peeling off another layer and getting deeper and deeper into the garden realm. So once you're in a location, you have effectively 3 options really, system wise. You can stay where you are, in which case you roll to see if other events occur, you can explore the location, etc. You can go back, which will either take you up a level, or if the doorway is still open, will take you back into the real world, or you can press on deeper. If you go deeper, then the sort of the level counter is increased by 1, and the GM rolls on the tables and describes another location, with the result that the level counter is added to the roll. So as you press further and further in, as I've said, the realm becomes ever more bizarre and out of touch with reality. So that's the broad sort of summary of it. The writing is very sort of no nonsense. There's no frills or ridiculous amounts of in-character text. There's a few little quotes and things that sort of give you like hints at what's occurred, and there's a description at the start of the book telling you the sort of rough overarching story as I've just given it, but you really are left to sort of your own devices, as it were. Now, whilst I can see some people may not like this, I personally think that's great. This book really comes off as a toolkit, and there's an awful lot crammed into the sort of 80 odd pages. I mean, looking at the contents page, we have a section for the introduction, we have a section on the various locations you can roll, a section on the various details, fountains, hedges, blood-sucking plants, stuff like that you can encounter. There is a bestiary covering everything from vine-animated skeletons to unicorns to rose maidens, which are strange sort of dryad-like creatures, but that are linked to rose bushes instead of trees. The worm, this huge aberration that is effectively like the garbage disposal of this place, and of course the idea of thorns, the mimetic infection that led to the Gardens of Ynn's downfall. And in addition to that, we have a part which has useful tables. So if you're sort of killed and resurrected in the Gardens of Ynn, you may appear with what are called Ynnian alterations, which are sort of strange sort of plant-based mutations and stuff like that actually reflect the fact that you've almost been like reborn in this garden, which is hard not to like a table of mutations for a fantasy game. So I think the writing, definitely for me, like I say, it's no nonsense, it does what it needs to do, no frills, and that's what I like. I'm giving that a plus all day, every day. For the look of the book, now I'm going to give it a blank for the look of the book, and that's not because it's bad at all, it's just because it only has a few bits of art in. You can see a little bit there. It's quite nice, it's just black and white, mostly showing sort of vines, plants, the odd little picture there showing some of the stranger inhabitants. It's not a graphical feast for the eyes, although I do like the whole sort of pale green cover, understated black and white artwork. I don't think it's a visual spectacle like some books are nowadays. So, like I say, I'm giving it a blank. It doesn't look bad. It looks as good as it needs to get the information across. And I expect if it did have loads more artwork in and was more of a spectacle, it would certainly cost a hell of a lot more. So, for the system, I'm going to give it a plus. And the reason for that is it's very simple to use, and although it sort of technically says it's for OSR, you see the OSR label on the back there, because it's a series of nested random tables with, okay, there's OSR stats for the various creatures and denizens you might come across. If you're willing to adapt it or just use similar stats from whatever game you're running, you could quite easily use the Gardens of Ynn in any sort of fantasy based or probably otherwise game. I can certainly see, like if you run like Dresden Files or something, the Gardens of Ynn could certainly be a handy little sort of pocket dimension, and various other games could quite easily use it. The random tables, the mechanics for exploring and stuff like that are very simple to understand and could easily be ported over to any game. So I think that's a great thing. Now, for background, I'm also going to give the game a plus. Now, as I've said earlier on, the background of the book isn't overstated. I mean, literally, if I have a look in the what are the Gardens of Ynn section at the very start of the book, and I read you a little bit of that, it says that Ynn is a perpendicular world. Compare the concept of parallel worlds. From any place in the real world, you can cross over to an equivalent in a parallel world. Any place has its parallel version, just shifted slightly. A perpendicular world, meanwhile, exists at right angles to reality, crossing over at certain points. The further one travels into the perpendicular world, the less like reality it becomes. Now, it goes on for a couple more paragraphs describing the specifics of the Gardens of Ynn, but even in just that one paragraph, it pretty much sets up the rest of the book. And that is pretty much the model that the Gardens of Ynn takes throughout the rest of the book. You're not given great heaping ladles full of fiction or sort of background material designed to just sort of like bombard you with the atmosphere of the place. It's subtly threaded throughout these random tables, and even the bits that aren't explained sound intriguing. For instance, I mentioned the Rose Guardians earlier, which are these strange sort of dryad creatures. Where did they come from? Were they placed here by the She who originally sort of built the realm? Were they spirits that were attracted by the garden itself? Are they some sort of immune system for the garden, maybe? A lot of that stuff is left up to you as the GM to decide, but there's plenty of hints in there to help you along the way, and that is what I really like in a book, when it has enough details to sort of spur ideas and give you creative suggestions without trying to like straitjacket you or tell you that, like, right, this is the way it's got to be. And I know you could say that, yeah, well, you can throw out the background in any book, but personally I like a book where I don't have to spend ages unpicking the backgrounds from the actual book to be able to put my own spin on it. I like a game where it just sort of says, like, here's a few ideas and some suggestions, run with it, do what you want with it, make it into yours, make it your game. And I think Gardens of Ynn does that spectacularly well. I've really enjoyed reading it. So if we look at our overall rating on the Fate ladder, we can see that it's got a +3 or a good rating. If you're looking for a book which will have an intriguing pocket realm in it, although I suppose there's nothing to say that you couldn't like import it into your main prime material plane, to use like D&D parlance, then I highly advise you giving the Gardens of Ynn a look. Like I say, for $5 or whatever it is US for the PDF, you really cannot go far wrong. And since it's a book that's mainly consists of tables and that you'd be able to roll on, I don't think you need to read it quite as thoroughly as you might do with other books. Now, I have trouble reading PDFs online for extended periods, so I've got myself a copy of the book, and I prefer having a hard copy for books that I'm liable to use in games, and I'm certainly thinking of using this in my upcoming CSI Midlands game. But I certainly think that I could have got away with using the PDF, because you only need to use it to reference when you're rolling. There's also a handy site online which has put a lot of the tables and automated them from the Gardens of Ynn onto a website. So you can sort of like click on a button and it will do it all for you. So in conclusion, if you're looking for an intriguing and reasonably priced book that covers an interesting pocket realm that your characters can explore, effectively a ready-made and randomly generated dungeon that will change each time they return, I really do advise you giving the Gardens of Ynn a look. So until I see you next time, I hope you've enjoyed this review, and if you have, you'll click on like and subscribe to my channel. You can also click on the little bell to get notifications anytime I put out new videos. Until I see you next time, take care, and whatever game you're playing, have fun and enjoy yourselves. See you later.